Hi to you, Joseph. Professor of
No,
microbiology.
I was professor in University of Southern California, and I was also in University of California, Los Angeles. I was in the University of Connecticut.
Okay, so you're a big professor.
I was
And
doing research in molecular biology.
you also-
I was getting millions of dollars from the U.S. government, and I was also consultant to the U.S. government. But it's like the story of the Taliban. First they fund you and they educate you, and then they try to shoot you.
Then they tried to shoot you. Now, you were exposing the corruption in the Californian courts, weren't you? Not exposing,
California and United States federal courts, but I was not working specifically. More specifically, I was my specialty is in investigating the computer systems of the courts and prisons. So I was publishing reports on corruption as it is enabled by large-scale fraud in the information systems of the California courts, of California prisons, federal courts, federal prison, and I was submitting reports to United Nations and publishing in academic journals.
you're actually a world leader, because you told me people are still contacting you from all the press to come and talk, write articles about it.
But when I was in the United States,
Apart from trying to shoot you there.
and no academic journal in the United States agreed to even accept my papers for review. At one point, just as for demonstration purpose, I submitted the paper to 6 human rights prominent journals in the United States, which are published through Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, the highest level law schools. And the standard in academic literature is you submit the papers, then they send you receipt notification that they received it for review. After that, there is some time that passes, and after that, they tell you if the review, if it passed or failed review. In my case, they refused to accept it for review.
Right.
So,
well, you were close to the bone. For people watching this, you're living in Tel Aviv, you're living in occupied camp Tel Aviv, you're Jewish, you're under asylum from Germany, you are not an anti-Semitic person, are you?
wow, that's all in the eye of the beholder.
All in the eye of the beholder.
I was accused that I am anti-Semitic or even Nazi.
By another Jewish Israeli.
Yeah, by a prominent attorney in Israel who is the CEO of a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting corruption and for honesty, I'm trying to translate, honesty and integrity.
So tell me, is the Israel court system honest? Does it have integrity? Is it corrupt? I mean,
I'm not an attorney. My specialty, as I mentioned before, is in investigating computer systems and IT systems, and I'm not a hacker either. So I had to escape from the U.S. and a long story, but they never charged me criminally, and they never asked for my extradition, although they tried to get me before I escaped. So I'm not a hacker. I do everything I do legally above board. Mm-hmm. So what I can say about the Israeli justice system is that I did thorough investigation of the computer systems of the Israeli courts going back 20 years, and there was a dramatic change in the system over the past decade, and it fell into deliberate, systemic, system-wide corruption. I can even pinpoint it. For example, in the Supreme Court, it took place on March 7, 2002 in the afternoon. I can pinpoint it that clearly.
what happened on that day?
They hacked the computer of the Supreme Court on that day, and since that day they forge, they defraud, and do anything they want.
Who's they? Inside job.
It was done by the justices of the Supreme Court.
Right. Okay. So we have a corruption inside the court system in Israel. That's what you're saying.
Definitely. But I'm not the only one who said it. The amazing thing is that I can show you reports, for example, of the State Ombudsman, report 60B from 2010, about the computerization of the courts in the previous decade. So he wrote in 2010 a report about the new IT systems which were implemented in the courts in the decade between 2000 and 2010. And anybody who understands anything about computers will realize right away that he's describing a large-scale organized crime situation, because the state ombudsman says, for example, the development of
we have a noisy environment, but I hope people can hear.
The new IT systems of the court, the development was outsourced to corporations. It was not done by state employees, number one. Number two, the contracts were signed with outside corporations with no legal tender in violation of the law. So it was a kind of a shady deal. The contracts were signed without specification of the systems to be developed, which is in disregard of the law of Israel relative to development of systems. There was no co-management of the project by any state employee. So it was kind of a shady, under-the-radar project. There was no examination of the final product or validation, as it's called professionally, by a state employee prior to its implementation in the courts as required by law. What else?
How serious is this in its impact on society here?
It's huge, but most people don't understand it. The impact, I focus right now on criminal cases with imprisonment, and so it's from the human rights perspective, it's a deprivation of liberty, which is pretty serious.
If you're innocent,
deprivation of life above it. But
if you're innocent, it is.
Yeah. So they engage in blatant cases of false imprisonment for various reasons through the fraud in the courts. But beyond it, there is huge fraud that is taking place through the same systems in anywhere from the family courts, and that I documented separately, through the largest financial cases. For example, we're sitting across in the background, you see the Tel-Aviv District Court. This is, in U.S. terms, this is similar to the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York in Manhattan, which does all the biggest stock market, corporate regulation, etc. So here in this district court, they do the largest bankruptcies, haircuts, mergers, Chapter 11 of large corporations, and they basically do fraud on billions of Israeli shekels. I documented it, for example, in the case of Chapter 11 case of IDB development, which is still going on. The fraud is just unbelievable, and the media cooperate. That means the media play the part by reporting what the courts want them to report, and they don't report the fact that there are no records, that the records are falsified, etc. But that is not surprising, because there are reports, for example, of United Nations. They had the Vienna Conventions under the title, which is interesting, Strengthening Judicial Integrity Against Corruption. So the official reports of the United Nations
was a corrupt report.
No, the reports are just reporting what different people from different nations said about the subject.
Right.
So, for example, they say that in nations where the judiciary is corrupt, media tends to cooperate.
Right.
Number one. It's true, for example, also in the UK, except for The Guardian, which is unique and commendable. The rest of the media in the UK, to the degree that I was following it, is not reporting on the level of corruption in the UK courts,
That's
which
true.
is a separate issue.
No, that's very
Same
true.
thing in the United States. For example, I documented and I lectured in the 2012 World Criminology Congress, the subject of which was the criminological basis of the financial crisis. And I was giving a lecture there on fraud in the U.S. District Court in Manhattan, in a case of a theft of $5.8 billion by several bank executives, and how they came off scotch-free. But it was reported like 40 times in the Wall Street Journal, 30 times in New York Times, in Times of London, Financial Times, Washington Post, and all of them said, what a great judge, how tough he is with everybody.
Right, so the media do cooperate here, and we also know coming out of the criminal, it's 99.8% conviction rate. It's massively high.
Wait a minute. The Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court says that it's not surprising because the state's prosecution here is so good that they screen the cases in advance. So they wouldn't come to court unless it's obvious that the person is guilty. But at the same time, there were several cases recently of blatant criminality of the state prosecution, and there were calls for, there is right now, an ombudsman on the state prosecution, but the state prosecution staff called a strike and they refused to cooperate with any attempt to review their conduct. So, for example, I'll give you just an example.
Yeah, we do struggle with ombudsmen here, don't we? They don't like ombudsmen much.
Yeah, but even when they have them, it's a joke. But I'll give you two examples. So, in the case of the ombudsman of the state prosecution, this is from this week. It's in the case of Roman Zadorov, who is falsely imprisoned for 10 years, a Ukrainian, non-Jewish, non-Israeli citizen, who was framed for murder, horrible murder of a 14-year-old girl 10 years ago, and he's sitting in jail now in prison for 10 years, part of a life sentence. And the best criminal experts in Israel say it's a judicial farce. One prominent law professor wrote in the newspaper, conviction with no real evidence. Another said, conduct of the state prosecution is scary. Now, the ombudsman of the prosecution issued this week a report which said what was known for a long time, that the state prosecution harassed and retaliated against the two most senior forensic doctors in Israel who testified for the defense and said that the evidence of the prosecution was completely fake. So the chief state prosecutor issued this week his response, which he said that he doesn't recognize the authority of the ombudsman of the prosecution to issue such report. But I'll give you another example of ombudsmen.
I'm sorry, that made me smile.
Another example of how ombudsmen work in Israel. There's ombudsmen of the judiciary also. But in general, the rule is, which is similar in the US and in the UK, I assume, UK I don't know so well, I know a little bit, that I call it any criminal activity of the gang, that means judges, prosecutors, etc., is not criminal by definition. At the worst, it's ethical misconduct. So I'm getting to the issue of the ethical misconduct of a deputy presiding judge of the Tel-Aviv District Court. She retired recently. She was known as the one who handled the biggest corporate bankruptcy and haircuts. You know what haircuts are? Like when a corporation has a large outstanding debt in bonds, and then they go to court and they say, we can't pay it, we're sorry, and the court decides, okay, you can just pay half of it. In one stroke of a pen, or with no stroke of a pen in the case of a fraud, the public, which is usually the people who save for retirement, etc., loses billions of dollars. So this lady, in one of these bankruptcy Chapter 11 haircut cases, faked a court protocol and decision.
This was a judge.
A judge, yeah, a judge.
She faked. Okay.
Because she wanted to screw an attorney. Now, this is in my jargon, and the